Good evening, and a very warm welcome back to Midnight Historian. As the world outside grows quiet and the shadows lengthen, I invite you to settle in, find your most comfortable position, and let the weight of the day simply fade away. Tonight, our journey through the stars reaches its final chapter. We are turning the worn, ink-stained pages of history to explore the deep mysteries behind the last three signs of the Zodiac: Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. Have you ever wondered why, for thousands of years, our ancestors looked at the flickering lights of the night sky and saw a goat with the tail of a fish, or a man pouring the waters of life into the void? These symbols are more than just stars. They are echoes of ancient Babylonian clay tablets and the poetic myths of the Greeks. As we begin our descent into these ancient tales, I'd love to hear from you. Where in this wide world are you listening from tonight? And what hour of the night is it for you? There is something so peaceful in knowing we are all watching the same stars from different corners of the earth. So, dim the lights, adjust your pillows, and breathe. Whether you're here to unwind, to learn, or to drift into a deep and restful sleep, I'm so glad you're with me. Now, let us begin. In the great river plains of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates spread their mud into fields and canals, a city could rise or starve on the timing of water. When to plant, when to harvest, when to store grain. The sky was not romance up there. It was a tool. It was a clock that did not need gears, a calendar written in light. For thousands of years, people watched the same things return. A cluster would climb above the horizon right when the weather shifted. The moon would travel its path across the same band of sky. In modern terms, it is the ecliptic, the track the sun appears to follow across the stars. The Babylonian tradition was built by scribes who could calculate and record. They kept lists. They copied older lists. Their astronomy belonged to the same culture that wrote laws on stone, counted wages in silver, and tracked debts in barley. The sky was measured. It was divided. It was turned into something you could use. Before there were 12 neat signs, there were constellations and star figures. Some were stories about gods, some were markers for the seasons. Out of that older sky, the three signs we are going to follow, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, belong to a particular neighborhood. Even today, astronomers call it the sea, a stretch of the sky filled with water-themed constellations. The ancients noticed it too, even if they explained it through gods and omens instead of star charts. Capricorn was a strange hybrid, a goat in front and a fish behind, and Babylonian sources called it the goat fish, associated with the water god. Aquarius was pictured as a figure pouring out an overflowing vase, again tied to Ea, and Babylonian catalogs identified Aquarius as Gula, the Great One, representing the god himself holding that vase. Pisces, the fishes, sits close by in the same watery region. The sky road that mattered most to astrologers ran right through all of them. So why does water dominate this part of the zodiac when Capricorn is later treated as an earth sign in astrology? The short answer is that the original images were not built from personality categories. They were built from seasonal timing and the religious symbols that matched it. In winter in Mesopotamia meant storms, swelling rivers, flood risk, and then the slow return of life. In Egypt, the whole rhythm of the year was tied to the Nile's behavior. Water was not a mood, it was a system. A society that lived by rivers turned river power into gods, and those gods climbed into the sky. The zodiac, as most people recognize it now, came later than those early star figures. Around the end of the 5th century BCE, Babylonian astronomers divided the ecliptic into 12 equal signs, each 30 degrees, matching an ideal year of 12 30-day months. That move matters more than it seems. It was a decision to make the sky mathematical. Constellations can be lopsided. Some take more sky than others. Some are sprawling. Some are tight. But a system built for calculation wants equal pieces. 12 equal signs means you can say where a planet is using a common scale, and you can compute positions. It turns the heavens into a coordinate system. That is the part people often miss when they imagine astrology as pure myth. Myth is everywhere in the pictures, but the engine under the hood is technical. Babylonian scholars developed methods for prediction and kept records of planetary and lunar data. When personal horoscopes appear clearly in the sources late in the 5th century BCE, they rely on that recorded data and on astronomical texts used as reference, not on someone stepping outside at the exact moment of birth to check where every planet sits. Astrology for the individual, the kind that tries to say something about a person's life from celestial signs, grows out of bureaucratic astronomy, out of notebooks and archives. This is where the story gets interesting for our 3 signs, because Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces sit right on the hinge between old images and new math. Their symbols are older than the neat wheel, but the wheel made them powerful. Once the Zodiac became 12 equal segments, each sign became a box you could put information into. Planets in Capricorn, Moon in Aquarius, a birth under Pisces. You could copy that into a report the way you copied a list of grain deliveries. That is how a myth becomes a system, not by poetry first, but by usage. At the same time, Egypt was building its own sky traditions, and they were not the same thing. Egypt had a star clock long before it had a Greek-style zodiac. Egyptians divided the night sky into 36 decans, star groups used to tell time through the night, with each decan rising in sequence. This is a different kind of sky organization. It is not 12 equal signs along the ecliptic. It is practical nighttime keeping and ritual timing. You can picture a priest or a temple astronomer in a tomb ceiling painting the decans as a guide for the hours, because the afterlife was imagined as a journey through a cosmic landscape that needed navigation. Yet the worlds were not sealed off from each other. Trade moved, empires moved. People were conquered, deported, resettled. Ideas traveled with scribes, merchants, soldiers, and priests. By the Hellenistic period, Greek scholarship became a mixing bowl. The Babylonians already had the 12-sign division. The Greeks named the 12 signs after constellations and linked them to date ranges based on the sun's path. What comes out of that fusion is the Western zodiac as most people know it, a calendar of signs tied to the seasons. You can call it Greek, but its bones are Babylonian. Egypt enters that later story in a visible way through Greco-Roman monuments. The famous zodiac at Dendera, carved on the ceiling of a chapel at the Temple of Hathor, is dated around the late Ptolemaic period, and studies of its depicted sky have been used to argue for dates around 50 BCE. That matters because it shows the zodiac in Egypt as a cultural import and adaptation, not as a straight line from Old Kingdom star lore to modern horoscopes. You see Egyptian figures alongside the 12 signs, a blending of systems rather than a single origin. This is also where people get tempted to compress history into a single simple claim. You will often see it said that Pisces, the 2 fish, appears as far back as an Egyptian coffin lid around 2300 BCE. Even a museum social media post has repeated that idea, pointing to 2 fish on an Egyptian coffin lid. The detail may be real in some form, but it needs caution. A pair of fish on a coffin lid does not automatically mean the 12-sign zodiac existed in Egypt at that time. Egypt had rich symbolism and stellar religion long before it had Greek-style zodiac wheels. A fish motif can be an ancestor, an echo, or simply a different symbol that later writers retrofitted into the zodiac story. The safer point, the point scholars keep coming back to, is that the 12 equal sign system takes shape in Babylonia in the late 5th century BCE and then spreads and transforms as it moves through Greek and Roman culture. So when we say the zodiac in this story, we are talking about several layers stacked on top of each other. At the bottom are very old star figures created in many places for many reasons. People saw a goat with a fishtail. People saw a man with water. People saw fish in a dark patch of sky. These pictures gave meaning and memory to the stars. Above that sits the Babylonian breakthrough, turning the sky road into a 12-part measuring system. This is the moment the zodiac becomes a grid, and grid systems spread because they work. They let you compare data. They let you predict. Above that sits the Greek reframing, assigning names, date ranges, and a new kind of narrative meaning. Then building a tradition that later writers, like Ptolemy, would formalize into the classical astronomical and astrological inheritance. Above that sits the Roman and later world, where these signs become part of art, politics, and personal identity. You see them on coins and ceilings. You see them in mosaics. You see them in manuscripts. You see them surviving into the modern era, long after the people who invented them are gone. There is one more twist in this foundation chapter, and it changes how you think about the zodiac. Even if you do not care about astrology, the sky does not stay fixed. Earth's axis wobbles slowly over time, a motion called precession. Because of it, the positions of the constellations relative to the seasons shift over centuries. In the ancient world, the sign called Aries roughly aligned with the constellation Aries at the spring equinox. Over long time spans, that alignment drifts. That is one reason modern astronomy and modern astrology do not match cleanly, and why the signs today are more symbolic than astronomically exact. Ancient astrologers did not know the full mechanics in the modern sense, but they noticed change. They had to because their craft depended on long records. If your system says a certain heliacal rising should happen on a certain kind of day, and it keeps arriving a little off, you either adjust your calendar or you argue with the sky, or you reinterpret the omen. Mesopotamian astronomy became strong because it was willing to compute and correct. That habit of correction is the hidden spine behind the myths. Now bring this back to Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. In the schematic zodiac, Capricorn marks the start of the winter portion. Aquarius follows. Pisces closes the cycle before the spring renewal. That is not a personality journey at first. It is a seasonal arc. It is the hard time of cold and flood risk, turning step by step toward the return of light. The images make sense in that context. The sea-goat belongs to the waters and the land, an animal that can endure the rough boundary where elements meet. The water-bearer pours. The fishes swim together in the deep, bound by a cord in later symbolism, a reminder that life is tied to forces you cannot see. There is a reason the Babylonians linked Capricorn and Aquarius to Ea. Ea, also known by the Sumerian name Enki, is a god of the watery deep, of wisdom, of the fresh subterranean waters that feed rivers and wells. When you read the iconography, you see vases spilling streams, you see fish and reeds, you see the idea that water is knowledge because it sustains everything. Aquarius in Babylonian catalogs represents Ea holding an overflowing vase. Capricorn, the goatfish, is the emblem of Ea in the same tradition. That pairing is not an accident. It is a theological map of the sky. The same burial study that traces Egyptian constellation identifications notes something else that's useful here. In Egyptian decan lists, there is a phrase translated as "under the tail of the goat," using hieroglyphs that combine a fishtail sign with a goat sign, hinting at how a fish-tailed goat image could exist in Egyptian sky lore as well. This kind of detail is what makes the ancient world feel real. People were not working from one source. They were looking up from different rivers and building systems that sometimes rhyme with each other, sometimes collide, sometimes merge. So when later Greeks tell a story about Pan leaping into a river and becoming half fish to escape Typhon, they are doing what cultures always do. They take an old star picture and give it a new story in their own language. When later writers link Aquarius to a flood survivor or a divine cupbearer, they are doing the same thing with a vase pouring water, translating a Mesopotamian god image into a Greek narrative. The history of the zodiac is full of those translations. You can almost track the roots of empire and scholarship in the way the symbols change. In Babylonia, Aquarius is a god, an overflowing vase, the power of flood that can destroy and renew. In Egypt, the water-bearer becomes tied to the annual Nile flood in later interpretations, because that is the central fact of Egyptian life. In Greek and Roman worlds, the water-bearer becomes a mythic figure, and the zodiac becomes personal destiny. And somewhere in the middle of all this, someone decided that the sky could be divided into 12 equal parts and labeled like shelves. That decision created the stage for everything that follows in our story. Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces are going to walk onto that stage with older costumes. Their symbols come from older river religions and older star law. The Babylonian system gives those symbols a permanent position in the year. Then Greek and Roman storytelling gives them faces and names that still survive. The earliest images we can point to for Capricorn are ancient and stubbornly consistent. A sea goat appears in Mesopotamian tradition, and the constellation Capricornus has been represented as a goatfish since at least the Middle Bronze Age, with the Babylonian name Mul-Shamash. That goatfish tied to Ea, that is the creature we will follow next, because once you see a goat wearing the ocean as a tail, you want to know who dared to invent it and what they thought it meant. Capricorn enters the story as a creature that looks like a mistake made on purpose. Its front half belongs to the rocky world, horn and hoof and stubborn muscle, built for climbing and for surviving thin air and harsh ground. Its back half belongs to the water, tail and fin and silent power built for depth and current. Later ages tried to tidy it up by calling it a horned goat, but the oldest version does not cooperate. In the earliest Mesopotamian star catalogs, the figure is named as the goatfish, written in Sumerian tradition as Mul-Shamash, and it is linked to the god Ea, known earlier as Enki, a divinity tied to fresh water, wisdom, and the deep sources that feed rivers and wells. That link to Ea is the first fact you need to hold on to, because it tells you what Capricorn was before it became a personality type. It was a divine emblem used to mark a section of sky and a section of the year. Mesopotamian astronomy was built in a world where water was both salvation and threat. In southern Mesopotamia, cities grew in a flat land that could not survive without canals. Canals did not behave like polite borders. They shifted, flooded, abandoned channels, returned in a different mood. A god of water was not just a poetic idea, he was a political fact. Enki, or Ea, was the one you thanked when the fields drank, and the one you feared when the banks failed. If Aquarius was the image of water being poured out from a vessel associated with then Capricorn was the creature that carried Ur's authority in animal form, an emblem of that same watery domain given horns and a spine. The goatfish is older than the neat 12-sign wheel. When modern sources talk about Capricorn being consistently represented as a goatfish since the Middle Bronze Age, they are pointing to a stubborn continuity across long stretches of time and across cultural translation. Babylonia did not invent the stars, but it did preserve their names and their images with remarkable discipline. Clay tablets could last, lists could be copied. A symbol that mattered to temple scholarship could survive wars and dynasties. That is why a figure like the goatfish can be tracked from Mesopotamian catalogs into Greek and Roman Capricornus with a shape that remains recognizably the same even after centuries of retelling. The shape is not simply decorative. It is a solution to a problem the ancients felt every year, which was how to understand a season that seemed to take life away and then slowly return it. In the later tropical zodiac, used by Western astrology, Capricorn begins at the winter solstice point, the moment when daylight has reached its shortest extent in the northern hemisphere and then begins to grow again. Even if you treat astrology as symbolic, you can see why that placement endured. Winter is the season of limits. Food runs low. Travel becomes harder. Illness spreads. The social world contracts into indoor spaces and close company. A sign placed at that threshold naturally gathers meanings about endurance, planning, and survival, because those are the real skills winter demands. The association of Capricorn with Saturn in later astrology fits the same logic. Since Saturn in classical astrological tradition is tied to boundaries, time, discipline, and the slow work of building what lasts. But if you stay with the oldest image, Capricorn does not look like a winter animal. A goat is plausible, a goatfish is not. That oddness is the clue that the image is not a naturalist observation, but a religious and astronomical sign. The goatfish belongs to the watery world of Ea, and the sea aspect of it makes sense in a Mesopotamian setting, where the divine waters were imagined not only as rivers, but as the deep, the subterranean freshwater, the sources beneath the earth that fed life. A creature that is half goat and half fish expresses a union of domains. It can climb the land, and it can move through the deep. It bridges the frontier where a human settlement tries to tame a river. The Greeks inherited the image, but they did not inherit the same god. When Greek writers and astronomers encountered the Babylonian constellations, they translated them into their own stories. The goatfish became Capricornus, and Greek language offered an older name for it as Igoeros, meaning goat-horned, a name that sits behind the Latin Capricornus, built from caper for goat and cornu for horn. Even the word itself tells you that one part of the creature, the goat part, was easier for the Greeks and Romans to domesticate in their imagination than the fishtail. They could make sense of horns. Horns were familiar in their myths. A fishtail attached to a goat was stranger, so it became a mythic explanation waiting to happen. One Greek root for explaining Capricorn runs through the story of Zeus's childhood, which is full of hiding places and foster parents, because Greek mythology loves the idea that power begins as something hunted. In one version, Zeus is raised and protected by Amalthea, often described as a goat, sometimes as a nymph who owns a goat, depending on the tradition. Amalia becomes a symbol of nurture and abundance, and her horn becomes the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, a magical object that produces food without end. Later writers connect this goat and horn imagery to Capricornus, because a horned goat in the sky invites the mind to link it to the most famous divine goat in Greek myth. The cornucopia itself is an old and flexible symbol, appearing across Greek and Roman art as a sign of prosperity and good fortune. Another Greek root is rougher and more dramatic, and it is the one that explains the fishtail directly. In that tradition, Capricornus is connected to Pan, the goat-legged god of wild places, music, and sudden fear. Pan is not a comfortable god. He is the sound of a twig snapping when you are alone. He is laughter you cannot locate. He belongs to edges, to uncultivated land, to places where civilization thins out. In the myth, a monster named Typhon attacks the gods. Typhon is a chaos figure, too huge and violent for easy description, a creature born from ancient forces that do not respect Olympian order. When Typhon comes, even the gods run. In one retelling, Pan throws himself into a river to escape and transforms, and the part of him under the water becomes fish, leaving him half goat and half fish. That story explains the goatfish as a divine improvisation under pressure. The Greeks loved that the cosmos is always one monster away from falling back into disorder. If you hold these Greek stories beside the Babylonian origin, you can see how translation works across centuries. The Babylonians did not need Typhon to explain a goatfish. They had Ea. They had a divine water world. The Greeks preferred narrative. They wanted an event, a chase, a moment of transformation. They turned an emblem into a scene. They made Capricorn into a story you could retell at a feast, not just a label you could copy onto a tablet. The Romans inherited both the Babylonian structure and the Greek storytelling, and then they did something very Roman with it. They turned Capricorn into propaganda. The most famous case is Augustus, the first emperor, who used Capricorn imagery on coins and in imperial symbolism. It was not an abstract preference, it was a political statement dressed as fate. Augustus was born on September 23rd, which puts his sun sign in Libra if you use the later tropical scheme. Yet, ancient discussions of his horoscope and symbolism often tied him to Capricorn in ways that scholars have described as deliberately flexible, a kind of astrological polyvalency that served imperial rhetoric. Coins depicting Capricorn as a sea-goat circulated under his rule. Museum cataloging and scholarship describe Capricorn in this context as a symbol of prosperity and the emperor's claim to a world-ordering destiny. This matters for our story because it shows how a star image becomes a badge. Augustus did not need to convince every citizen that astrology was true in a philosophical sense. He needed symbols that felt inevitable. If the emperor's rise could be framed as written in the sky, it became harder to imagine a world without him. Capricorn, with its older aura and its link to the turning of the year, was perfect for that. The sea-goat on a coin is not a private superstition. It is a public announcement that Rome's order has cosmic endorsement. The fact that Capricorn is a hybrid creature is useful here too. Hybrids are lineal. They belong to two worlds. An emperor also claims to belong to more than one world, to be human yet above ordinary men, to be a political leader yet touched by something like the divine. The imagery of Capricorn in Roman art often keeps the fishtail even when the name emphasizes horns. That tail is the part the eye remembers. It is the reminder that Capricorn did not begin as a simple goat. It began as an older river creature, a figure from the water-dominated sky zone. When Augustus or other Romans put it on money, they were borrowing that ancient strangeness and using it to suggest that their reign was rooted in deep time, older than the Republic, older than any single city, part of the same order that moves stars and seasons. That is what makes the propaganda work. It does not argue, it implies. To understand why Capricorn gathered later meanings of discipline and ambition, it helps to separate two things that people often merge without noticing. There is the constellation Capricornus, a pattern of stars, faint and low in the sky for many northern observers, but recognized as one of the ancient zodiac constellations and listed by Ptolemy in the 2nd century as part of the inherited classical sky map. Then there is the sign Capricorn, the 30-degree section of the zodiac used in astrology. The sign is not exactly the same as the constellation because the sign system is based on divisions of the ecliptic rather than the irregular shapes of star groupings. This is why Capricorn can be an earth sign ruled by Saturn in astrology while still carrying a waterborne myth. The sign's later character is built from the season and the philosophical system layered onto it, while the constellation's older story is built from river, religion, and ancient star law. Even the name carries this double identity. Oxford reference works trace Capricornus to Latin Capricornus, built from kappa, meaning goat, and cornu, meaning horn, patterned after the Greek term for goat-horned. You can hear the Romans simplifying the creature in the act of naming it, focusing on the horns because horns are the part that fits the word. Yet the image persists as a sea goat in art and in the constellation tradition because the fish tail is too central to erase. This tension between name and image is not a footnote. It is the story of the zodiac itself. The zodiac is a system that keeps absorbing new meanings without fully shedding the old ones. Capricorn also sits at a cultural crossroads where practical seasonal marking becomes moral symbolism. If you ask why Saturn becomes the ruler, the answer lies in how ancient and medieval astrologers organized the planets into roles. Saturn is the slowest visible planet to the naked eye, associated with long cycles and with the limits of the visible sky. It becomes a natural patron for a sign tied to the cold edge of the year, the time when life slows and planning matters more than speed. In the simplest language, Capricorn becomes the part of the calendar that teaches restraint, not as virtue signaling, but as survival strategy. The mythology gives you the creature, the season gives you the mood, the philosophical system gives you the rulership. There is another layer that makes Capricorn feel less like a tidy symbol and more like a real historical artifact. And it comes from the way different cultures kept recognizing something similar even when they used different names. In Indian tradition, the equivalent is Makara, often represented as a crocodile-like creature. That is not the same as a goatfish, but it belongs to the same family of boundary animals, creatures that live where land and water meet, and that carry a sense of ancient power. Mediterranean and Near Eastern traditions use different creatures to express similar fears and hopes, which is what you expect when societies share a world of seasonal rivers and seaways. You can treat this as a symbol echo rather than a direct line, but it shows that Capricorn's hybrid nature is not an accident. It belongs to a wider human habit of putting water monsters and shore creatures into the sky. By the time astrology becomes popular as a personal practice in the Hellenistic and Roman worlds, Capricorn can be read in multiple registers at once. A learned reader might remember that the goatfish is sacred to Ea in the old Mesopotamian sky catalogs. A Greek storyteller might recall Pan's desperate dive to escape Typhon. A Roman citizen might see the sea goat on a coin and think of Augustus and stability and prosperity. And an astrologer might say Saturn rules Capricorn and talk about duty, time, structure, and the long climb toward achievement. All of these meanings can coexist because none of them fully replaces the others. Capricorn becomes a container. The goatfish endures, and each age pours its own concerns into it. What stays consistent across all versions is the sense that Capricorn belongs to threshold moments. It is a creature of thresholds, half one thing, half another. It is a sign anchored to a threshold in the year, the solstice turning point. It is also a political threshold in Roman usage, the shift from republic chaos to imperial order, framed as destiny. If you want a single reason Capricorn lasted, it is that thresholds are where people need stories most. When time turns, when regimes change, when the river rises, When a winter begins, a society reaches for a symbol that says this is part of a bigger pattern, and you can survive it if you recognize the pattern. And there is the water again, always returning. Capricorn is followed by Aquarius in the Zodiac sequence. In the sky, Capricorn sits in that watery neighborhood where constellations are named for seas and fishes and vessels. The goatfish is the first sign we meet in this part of the story, but it is not alone. It points forward to the next figure, the one holding the jar, the one's whole identity is the act of pouring water out, and that transition is not arbitrary. The old Mesopotamian tradition already linked both Capricorn and Aquarius to Ea, the water god. And the pairing makes a kind of theological sense. First you see the emblem, the goatfish, then you see the god's action, the water being poured. And then you reach Pisces, where the water becomes living creatures moving together in the deep. Aquarius is easier to recognize than Capricorn. A human figure holds a jar, a vessel, sometimes an amphora, sometimes something closer to a broad-shouldered pot, and from it pours a stream that never seems to run out. In later star maps, the water becomes a ribbon of lines. In older imagination, it is something more concrete. It is the first rush of a flood that turns hard ground into slick clay. It is the steady spill from a canal gate. It is the river rising at the wrong time and forcing a city to work through the night with baskets and reeds. It is also the rare gift of water arriving when a season has been stingy. Aquarius has always been about release. The picture is not a mystery, but the reason it matters is older than the picture itself. For the societies that built the earliest sky law, the water was the clearest sign that the world had rules, and the clearest reminder that those rules could still break you. In Mesopotamia, the figure that would become Aquarius belonged to the domain of Ea, the god of sweet water and deep wisdom. In later Babylonian star catalogs and later descriptions, Aquarius appears as a man with an overflowing vase, and texts identify this figure with Ea himself. The jar is not just a jar, it is an emblem of a divine supply. The ancients imagined cosmic waters beneath the world, the underground sources that fed springs and rivers, and Ea ruled that depth. If Capricorn's goatfish carried the same god's stamp, Aquarius shows the god in action. The water is being poured out, not in a gentle, domestic way, but in a way that suggests power. The stream looks like a decision. It is something granted or unleashed. When later writers call Aquarius a water bearer, it sounds like a simple job. In the older setting, it is closer to a cosmic function. The one who pours controls whether the fields live, whether the marshes expand, whether the river behaves, whether the city can plan its year or must improvise. This is the kind of symbol that survives translation because the need behind it never goes away. Across the ancient Near East, water and rule were tied together. Whoever controlled irrigation controlled hunger. Whoever controlled hunger controlled labor, tax, and stability. A stable calendar was part of that control, and a stable calendar relied on predictable seasons. Yet rivers had their own tempers. Mesopotamia had floods and also drought, and also years when the water arrived at the wrong time. A society built on irrigation becomes obsessed with timing, and timing is the reason the heavens mattered. Aquarius, then, is not a charming constellation. It is part of an administrative worldview. The sky is red because the ground needs answers. Egypt gives Aquarius a different emphasis without changing the core idea. The Nile was not like the Tigris and Euphrates. Its flood was more regular and more central to the entire structure of Egyptian life. The year was shaped around the inundation, the season when the Nile rose and covered fields in water and silt, then receded and left behind a fertile skin of mud. That flood was not simply weather, it was the engine of agriculture and the backbone of royal legitimacy. Because a pharaoh who presided over plenty looked like a pharaoh favored by the gods. When later tradition ties Aquarius to the rising of the Nile, it is describing the same deep link between the water-bearer and the survival of a civilization. An image of a figure pouring water becomes a way to speak about the moment the year turns from anxiety to possibility. The jar tips, the water comes, and the world is allowed to start again. There is a temptation to treat these symbols as if they were invented to match modern astrological meanings, but the direction is reversed. The symbol comes first, rooted in river life and temple theology, and later centuries extract personality language from it. What makes Aquarius durable is that it can support multiple readings without breaking. It can be the god of fresh water in Mesopotamia. It can be an emblem of inundation in Egypt. It can become, in Greek retellings, a human story about a cupbearer in a divine court. It can also become, for astrologers, a sign that stands for ideals, networks, and the movement of ideas through society. Because water in a jar is also a metaphor for something carried from one place to another. A vessel implies transport. A poured stream implies distribution. Those are social metaphors as much as agricultural ones. When Greek writers and astronomers absorbed the Zodiac system and began attaching their own myths to the signs, Aquarius attracted stories that fit its shape. One candidate was Deucalion, the flood survivor, a figure who belongs to the Greek tradition of world reset myths. In that story, a great flood wipes out humanity, and Deucalion and Pyrrha survive by building a chest or boat and riding the waters until they reach land again. Afterward, they repopulate the world in a strange and memorable way by casting stones behind them that become people. That method of creation sounds odd in modern ears, but the point of the story is recognizable. Flood is a divine correction. Survival is a kind of favor. Afterward, life returns by a ritual that feels like law rather than romance. The flood story fits Aquarius because Aquarius is already a sign of water released on a large scale. It turns a sky symbol back into a moral narrative. The water-bearer becomes a reminder that the gods can clean the slate and that human life continues because someone endured the water and found a shore. But the story that became most closely tied to Aquarius in later classical tradition is the story of Ganymede, because it uses the jar in a way that is both intimate and political. Ganymede is a Trojan youth described as exceptionally beautiful. Zeus sees him and decides he wants him in Olympus. In many versions, Zeus takes the form of an eagle and carries him away. In Olympus, Ganymede becomes the cupbearer of the gods, serving nectar or wine, the drink of immortality. This is not a gentle story. It is about power and seizure. It is also about elevation. A mortal becomes a servant in the divine court, which is a kind of promotion and a kind of captivity at once. For a society that lived with clear hierarchies, that paradox made sense. You could be honored and trapped in the same breath. A cupbearer is not a king, but he stands close enough to power that he shares in its glow. Aquarius, in this interpretation, is not just water. It is service. It is the handling of sacred liquid. It is being entrusted with what keeps a system alive, whether that system is the fields or the gods. That is also why Aquarius fits the later astrological habit of describing the sign as socially oriented, collective-minded, involved with networks and communities. Even if you do not accept astrology as causal, you can see how the metaphor is built. A cupbearer does not drink alone. He serves a group. He moves through a gathering. The value of his role is in distribution, not possession. The myth of Ganymede makes Aquarius about circulation. In one version, the vessel holds nectar. In another, it holds water. Either way, the point is that something vital is being poured from a source to those who depend on it.
It is easy to see how later astrologers turned that into a personality language about sharing knowledge, spreading ideas, and thinking beyond the self. The older Mesopotamian association with Ea adds another dimension. Ea is not only a water god, he is a god of wisdom, of craft, of clever solutions. That matters because it gives Aquarius an intellectual undertone long before modern astrology decided Aquarius should be the sign of innovation. In myths about Eri or Enki, he often acts through planning rather than brute force. He uses rules, secrets, and precise actions. If Aquarius is Ea holding an overflowing vase, then the water is not only nourishment, it is also knowledge poured into the world. In that reading, Aquarius becomes an image of transmission. You do not need modern psychology to get there. You only need to recognize that in many ancient traditions, water and wisdom are linked because both are life-giving, and both can be hidden, and both can flood. There is also a reason Aquarius feels connected to public life in later centuries, and it has to do with calendars. In the system of 12 signs, Aquarius sits in the deep winter segment after Capricorn and before Pisces. It is a time when the year is still harsh, but the light has begun to return. If Capricorn feels like survival and endurance, Aquarius feels like the first planning for what comes next. In agricultural societies, there is a season for labor and a season for preparation. Winter does not stop thinking, it concentrates it. People talk more because they are inside more. They repair tools, they argue, they plan marriages, agreements, and the next year's strategy. A sign that sits in that slot can gather meanings about the mind and the group, even if its original image was simply water. The calendar itself becomes a generator of symbolism. Ancient astronomy also gives Aquarius a particular identity because of its position in the sky. Aquarius is one of the larger constellations, and it sits in that region sometimes called the sea, because it is surrounded by water-themed constellations. The water bearer pours into the mouth of a fish in some depictions, or into a stream that connects to other watery figures. This neighborhood effect matters because the ancients thought in patterns. A single sign was rarely isolated. It belonged to a cluster of associations. Capricorn's fishtail, Aquarius's jar, Pisces's pair of fish. Together, they form a sequence of water images that make sense as a seasonal arc and as a mythic zone. A river culture would notice that and reuse it. When Hellenistic astrology matured, Aquarius received its technical labels. It became a fixed air sign in the later Western system, and it was assigned rulerships and dignities. Traditional astrology often links Aquarius to Saturn, and modern astrology commonly adds Uranus as a co-ruler after Uranus's discovery. Because astrologers like to attach newly visible planets to signs that match their symbolic themes, the Saturn link reinforces the idea of structure, rules, and social systems. Saturn is the planet of boundaries and time, and Aquarius becomes, in that scheme, the place where boundaries are organized into institutions.
That is why Aquarius is often described as concerned with society at large rather than personal desire. It is a story about how a sign once connected to the god of subterranean fresh water becomes connected to the concept of civic order. Again, you can see the metaphor evolve. Water is controlled by gates and canals. Societies are controlled by laws and norms. The one who pours decides where the stream goes. The one who legislates decides where power flows. The best way to keep Aquarius grounded is to remember that the symbol does not need modern traits to be meaningful. A water bearer is already a role with weight in ancient life. Someone carried water to households. Someone managed wells. Someone opened gates. Someone measured allotments. Those were jobs that touched survival. In a city, water distribution was politics. In a temple, it was ritual. In a palace, it was prestige. The cupbearer at a royal table was often a trusted position because he handled what the king consumed. He could poison or protect. He could listen. He could observe. This reality sits behind the myth of Ganymede, even if the myth dresses it in divine drama. When later eras romanticized Aquarius as the sign of idealism, they were echoing an older truth. The water bearer stands where power and necessity meet. He is close to the source and responsible for the flow. There is a darker side to that too, and ancient stories do not always hide it. A flood can be mercy and punishment at once. A cupbearer can be honored and exploited. Aquarius can be framed as a symbol of generosity, but it can also be framed as a symbol of control, because whoever pours can decide who drinks. In real history, floods can build a society's wealth by depositing fertile silt, and they can also destroy homes and erase a season's work. Ancient people did not treat water as purely good. They treated it as essential and dangerous. That ambivalence is part of why Aquarius keeps drawing stories about large change, societal shifts, and the tension between individual life and the forces that rearrange it. This is also where Aquarius begins to point toward Pisces, because once you have poured out the water, you are no longer talking about the act of distribution. You are talking about what lives within the water and what the water does to those who enter it. Aquarius is an image of action, the jar tipping, the stream falling. Pisces is an image of consequence, creatures moving together in the current. The transition is natural. In the older Mesopotamian layer, Aquarius and Capricorn share the association with Ea. Pisces carries other strands, but it still belongs to the same watery region, and later Greek myth will tie Pisces to a moment of escape in a flood of danger. Aquarius prepares that logic. Once you accept that water can become a road for survival, you are ready for the story of the twin fishes that carry gods away from a monster. If you step back, Aquarius is a clear example of how the Zodiac's images bridge three different worlds at once. There is the world of practical seasonal timing, where the sign marks a toggle point in the year. There is the world of religious symbolism, where the water bearer is a divine figure tied to cosmic waters. There is the world of myth retelling, where the water bearer becomes a named person, Deucalion or Ganymede. And the act of pouring becomes a story about fate, power, and survival. The modern wheel does not erase any of this, it stacks it. Aquarius becomes a sign people argue about, but it began as a picture of the simplest truth that river civilizations never forgot. Life depends on water, and water comes when it chooses, or when someone with authority chooses, and either way,
you live with the consequences. By the time you reach Pisces, the zodiac's water stops being something poured from a jar and becomes something that can carry life. Aquarius is an act, a vessel tips, a stream falls. Pisces is what happens next. Two fish appear where you expect a single creature. They move as a pair, bound together by a cord, swimming in opposite directions as if each is pulled by a different current. That cord is the detail people remember. It turns a simple sea image into a claim about danger and loyalty. The fish are not just in water.
They are in trouble, and the trouble is big enough to justify a constellation. If you trace Pisces backward through the texts, you find layers like silt on a riverbank. The Greco-Roman stories are the ones most people hear first, but those stories sit on top of older Near Eastern star law. Pisces did not begin as a sentimental image. It began as a piece of sky that mattered for the calendar, and for the same reason Capricorn and Aquarius mattered. The sun and planets pass through this region. A culture that builds meaning around that celestial road will name the figures along it, then keep refining those names until they become a system. In the oldest stratum we can point to with confidence, Pisces is connected to Babylonian constellation material. What later becomes the Western Pisces appears to be assembled from earlier Babylonian figures, including one called the Great Swallow, and another figure identified as Anunitum, Lady of Heaven. This is not yet a clean two-fish image as most people picture it today. It is a composition that becomes Pisces over time as different traditions compress and rearrange what they inherited. In 1st millennium BCE Babylonian records, there is also a term that translates as the fish cord or ribbon, a clue that the cord motif, the abstract binding line between creatures, was already present as part of the constellation's identity long before Greek poets gave it a clean myth. The cord matters because it is an abstract idea made visible, a link, a tie, a constraint, a reminder that even in the water, you do not move alone. That is the Near Eastern foundation. When Greek and Roman writers later tell you why Pisces is in the sky, they reach for a story that explains both the fish and the cord, and they choose a crisis. The crisis is Typhon. Typhon belongs to the category of monster that exists to remind the audience that order is never guaranteed.
In Greek myth, Typhon is not a local threat or a clever villain. He is something like a natural disaster given a body. His origins shift from source to source, but the function stays stable. Typhon arrives when the Olympian order is still young enough to be tested, and he pushes the gods into flight. This is the same pressure that produced Capricorn in one familiar version, where Pan leaps into the river and becomes a goatfish. Typhon is the common enemy that ties together the water signs in this part of the zodiac, because Typhon forces gods to use water as an escape route. In the Pisces story, Aphrodite and Eros are the ones in immediate danger. Aphrodite is the goddess of desire and persuasion, a power that works through charm, not force. Eros is love's sharp point, the child who makes even gods act irrationally. Neither of them makes sense as a warrior facing a monster that breathes chaos. So, they run. The setting is often Syria or the Euphrates in the Greco-Roman telling, a geographic detail that is easy to overlook and worth taking seriously. The myth places Greek deities in Near Eastern landscape. That is not accidental. It reflects the way these stories were told and retold in the Hellenistic world, where Greek culture spread through older civilizations and absorbed their sacred places, then rewrote them into Greek language. The escape works in a few different ways depending on which author you follow. In one line of telling, Aphrodite and Eros transform into fish and swim away. In another, two fish appear to rescue them, carrying them on their backs through the current and out of danger. Some versions combine the ideas. They leap into the river, they become fish, they tie themselves together so they will not be separated, and they survive. The cord becomes practical. It is not decoration, it is an emergency measure. It says the river is strong enough to split them apart. It says fear makes even gods think like sailors.
The myth then explains the constellation as a reward or a memorial. The fish become stars because they saved a goddess and her child, or Aphrodite and Eros become stars in fish form because their escape was worth remembering. The Roman poets liked this sort of transformation into the sky, the idea that an event becomes permanent above human heads. There is a harsh beauty to it. A moment of panic becomes a fixed pattern. A desperate swim becomes an annual marker in the calendar. That is what catasterism does. It turns story into sky. If you read the Roman side of the tradition, you find hints that the story was not treated as minor. Manilius, writing his Astronomica in the early Roman imperial period, includes Pisces among the signs, and treats the zodiac as a serious framework for understanding fate and character. He echoes the idea that Venus owed her safety to the fish. That line became one of the little hooks later writers repeat because it nails the point. The fish are not symbols of fertility in that moment. They are lifeboats. The other major Pisces origin story is Stranger. It exposes another seam where Greek myth intersects Near Eastern cult. In this version, an egg falls into the Euphrates. Fish roll it to the shore. Doves sit on it until it hatches, and out comes Aphrodite, then called the Syrian goddess. If you hear this and think it sounds less like Greek myth and more like a local tale grafted onto Greek names, you are hearing correctly. The Syrian goddess is often linked by later writers to Ataratus, also called Derketo in Greek sources, a powerful fertility and water-associated deity worshipped in parts of Syria. In some accounts, she is connected with fish and with a taboo against eating fish. Stories about her drowning or transforming help explain why fish became sacred in her cult. When Greek and Roman authors tried to interpret the religions of Syria through their own myth language, they often equated local goddesses with Aphrodite or Hera. And that interpretive habit opened the door for hybrid stories. An egg in a river, fish and doves tending it, a goddess emerging. This feels like myth from a place where water and fertility are the central facts, then translated for an audience that already knows the name Aphrodite. This matters because it shows Pisces as more than a single Greek rescue story. Pisces is a crossroads constellation. It absorbs myth lines from Mesopotamia, Syria, Greece, and Rome. It carries the smell of trade routes and conquest. It is the zodiac sign that most clearly keeps the Euphrates in the picture, even after the zodiac is framed as a Greek system. When a myth insists on naming the Euphrates, it is keeping a memory of origin alive. It is admitting, even if indirectly, that the fish story belongs to an older river world. Now look at the symbol again with that in mind. Two fish bound together. That is not the obvious way to draw fish. If the point was simply abundance, you might draw a net full of fish. If the point were fertility, you might draw a single fish in spawning season. Two fish tied together suggests constraint. It suggests conflict and balance. In later astrological interpretation, Pisces becomes a sign associated with duality, with being pulled between worlds, with imagination and escape. People often treat that as modern psychology pasted on an old sign. In fact, the duality is already sitting there in the cord, and in the direction the fish swim. The image itself argues that the Piscean condition is not straightforward. It is movement under tension. Astronomy adds a small but revealing note to this. In classical descriptions of the constellation, there is emphasis on the joining point of the chords, the knot that connects the two fish. Later star atlases gave that knot a star.
Ptolemy, describing Pisces in the Almagest, notes the point where the chords are knotted. In Arabic star naming tradition, the star Al-Farkam is called Al-Raya, often glossed as the cord. This is what makes Pisces feel tactile. It is not just fish floating in space, it is fish tethered by a visible line, pinned together by a knot that can be located on a chart. The myth and the star map reinforce each other. You can point to the knot and say, there, that is where they tied themselves together in the river. Whether you believe that is true in a literal sense is beside the point. The system invites you to see narrative in the sky. This is also why Pisces becomes the sign people later associate with rescue, sacrifice, and compassion. The oldest Greek rescue myth is literally about saving someone from a monster. The egg myth is about protecting a fragile beginning until it becomes divine. Even if you strip away all later astrological traits, those themes remain. Pisces is about being carried. Pisces is about being protected. Pisces is about the thin line between drowning and surviving. A culture that tells that kind of story in the night sky is admitting something simple. Life does not always come from strength. Sometimes it comes from help. There is another way to read Pisces that becomes clear when you set it beside Capricorn and Aquarius. Capricorn is the hybrid that survives a catastrophe by changing shape. Aquarius is the figure who controls the flow, who pours out what the world depends on. Pisces is what you get when water becomes the stage for salvation. But salvation is not free. The two fish must be tied together because separation means death. In that single detail, Pisces becomes less dreamy and more hard-edged than its modern reputation.
It is not a sign that says everything is gentle. It is a sign that says the current is strong, and you will lose people if you do not hold on. If you want a documentary kind of clarity, step away from the poetry and look at how these myths behave in time. Greek myth is not a single canon. It is a field of competing local stories, then later authors choosing and arranging them. When you see Pisces connected to the Euphrates, you are looking at a myth that probably benefited from Hellenistic cultural mixing when Greek language and scholarship met older Syrian and Mesopotamian traditions. When you see a Syrian goddess called Aphrodite, you are looking at interpretatio, the habit of translating foreign gods into Greek equivalents. When you see Ovid turning the story into Roman verse, you are looking at a Roman world that loved Greek myth as material, but wanted to claim it as its own. Through all of that, the constellation stays, the fish stay, the cord stays, the sky keeps the outline while the story shifts around it. This is the point where Pisces begins to brush up against later religious symbolism in a way the other signs do not. Fish are not rare symbols, but they become unusually charged in the Mediterranean world. They are food, trade, offerings, and in some cults, taboo. In Syrian contexts tied to Atargatis, fish could be sacred and not eaten. In Greek contexts, fish are common, but they also belong to the sea's divine domain. In Roman contexts, fish are ordinary and luxurious, depending on the species. Then Christianity arrives inside the Roman Empire and takes fish into a new symbolic life through Greek wordplay and sacramental imagery. That later story belongs more fully in the next stage of our outline, but it is already waiting here in Pisces. A constellation of fish is a ready-made canvas for a culture that wants a sign of belonging and survival.
Pisces also carries an older echo that is easy to miss if you only read Greco-Roman sources. Mesopotamian religion and myth often use watery images for boundaries between worlds. The deep is where wisdom and danger coexist. A fish is a creature that lives in a realm humans cannot inhabit without tools. When you put fish in the sky, you are doing something subtle. You are bringing the alien realm above and making it readable. You are saying the deep has a pattern, it has an order. Even there, even in water that can kill you, there are lines you can trace, stars you can name, chords you can follow. That is what a constellation is in the end. It is a way to make an indifferent universe feel legible. Pisces is often described in modern astrology as the last sign, the ending of a cycle. That is not wrong as metaphor, but the older myths give it a sharper edge. Pisces is not only about dissolving, it is about surviving dissolution. It is about getting through the water without losing each other. It is about a goddess and a child who cannot fight, finding a way to live. It is about a beginning, an egg in a river protected until it becomes something that can stand on land. Those are not soft themes. They are practical themes dressed as divine events. Now, with Pisces in place, the three signs begin to look less like separate chapters and more like one long incident told from different angles. A monster threatens, a god dives and becomes a goatfish, a vessel pours, a world floods, a system of water decides who lives, two fish tie themselves together and escape. Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces all become ways to talk about water as power, water as danger, water as life. The Zodiac sequence here is not random. It is a narrative of winter and flood and survival, written into the calendar and preserved by cultures that lived at the mercy of rivers.
Typhon is the hinge that makes these three signs feel like one continuous story instead of three separate pictures pasted onto a wheel. If Capricorn is the moment a god grows a fishtail to survive, and Pisces is the moment a goddess and her child are carried through a river by living creatures, then Typhon is the pressure that forces those choices. He is the reason the water matters. Without Typhon, Capricorn could stay a strange emblem of the deep, and Pisces could stay two fish tied together for reasons nobody remembers. With Typhon in the background, the symbols sharpen into something closer to a record of how the ancient mind understood catastrophe. A monster comes, order breaks, and the gods themselves must run, improvise, and cling to each other the way people do. Greek myth uses Typhon as a stress test for the Olympian world. He is not a rival in the usual sense. He is not a king from another city or a god with a competing shrine. He is the kind of thing that arrives from outside the comfortable map. Ancient writers describe him in pieces rather than as a clean portrait, because he is meant to feel too large for clean description. In some versions, he has 100 heads. In others, he throws mountains. In others, he breathes fire. In others, he hisses like storms. And the details vary because the role is the constant. Typhon is what happens when the earth stops cooperating. In practical terms, he resembles the worst things a farming society fears: drought, wildfire, earthquake, flood, and war, compressed into one adversary so it can be argued with as if it had a mind. When the gods flee Typhon, the story becomes less about divine power and more about how a culture thinks survival works. A warrior god meets an enemy in open battle. That is one kind of story. A god who runs, changes form and hides in a river is a different kind. That second kind is the one that connects directly to Capricorn and Pisces. It suggests that survival is not always about strength. It is about choosing the right element. It is about escape routes. It is about knowing where safety lives, even if the safety is temporary. The moment you put gods into a river, you make them relatable without making them small. They still matter because they represent forces, but they also act like beings who can be cornered. Look at the structure of the Capricorn story. Pan is not one of the clean, polished Olympians. He is an edge god, a wilderness god, a being of sudden noise and sudden fear, which is why the word panic ends up attached to his name. Pan belongs to the rough places, the high rocks, the caves, the goat paths. He is not the kind of god you expect to see at a formal divine council. In the Typhon crisis, Pan is exactly the kind of figure who would know how to survive because he lives close to the parts of the world that do not follow human rules. When Typhon comes, Pan does not meet him with speeches. He moves, he dives, he changes. In the version that ties him to Capricorn, Pan enters a river and becomes partly fish. The transformation is practical. Fish is what survives in water. Goat is what survives on rock. The hybrid that results is not a fantasy creature created for decoration. It is a survival mechanism made visible. Then look at the Pisces story. Aphrodite is the goddess of attraction and persuasion, but she is not the goddess of direct violence. Eros is small and fast, powerful in consequence, but not in the way a warrior is powerful. In a Typhon crisis, they do not win by strength. They win by not being where the monster's strength can reach them. They use the river, either by transforming into fish themselves or by being carried by fish. And they use a cord so they do not lose each other. That cord is a detail that makes sense in the physical world. Anyone who has watched a flood understands it. Water separates, water pulls, water takes things downstream, and it does not care whether those things are sacred. The myth places gods inside that reality. A cord is what a frightened person would use. It is what a parent would use. It is what a Salem would use. It makes the myth feel as if it has a memory of real disaster inside it. When you put the two stories side by side, you can see that Capricorn and Pisces are not simply adjacent signs, they are adjacent solutions. In Capricorn, a god survives by becoming a boundary creature. In Pisces, a goddess survives by accepting help and by staying bound to the one she cannot lose. Aquarius sits between them with a different kind of power, the power of water as a controlled force, the one who pours rather than the one who flees. In the Typhon frame, Aquarius becomes the quiet reminder that water can be weapon and rescue and renewal, depending on who holds the jar and where the stream is allowed to go. This is where it helps to think like a historian for a moment and ask why the Greeks reached for water in these stories. Greece is not Mesopotamia. The Greek world has rivers, but it is not built on massive irrigation plains in the same way. Yet Greek myth is full of flood stories. Deucalion survives a flood that resets humanity. Rivers have gods and nymphs. The sea is a major power, and sea storms can erase fleets. Water in Greek imagination is both boundary and pathway. It separates islands, but it also connects them. It is danger, but it is also trade. A culture that lives around the sea will develop a deep respect for water's ability to decide outcomes. Put that together with older Near Eastern influences, and you begin to see why Typhon crises often push characters toward rivers and shorelines. In the Eastern Mediterranean, water is the great indifferent force. It can hide you, it can kill you, it can carry you into exile.
It can bring strangers to your harbor. It can also bring grain and wealth. It is a natural stage for myths about survival. There is another layer beneath Typhon that is easy to miss if you only read Greek texts. The Eastern Mediterranean is a region where myths travel with merchants, soldiers, and priests. Greek Typhon has cousins and echoes in the storm monster traditions of neighboring cultures. You can hear distant resonance with tales where a younger divine order fights an older chaos force, where thunder and wind and sea must be tamed so a stable world can exist. The details are not identical, and it would be dishonest to say one culture simply copied another, but the family resemblance is clear. Typhon, in that sense, is not merely a Greek invention. He is part of a regional grammar for talking about chaos, and that grammar often uses water as one of its main verbs. When chaos rises, water rises. When order returns, water returns to its channels. This matters because Capricorn and Aquarius already belong to a Mesopotamian water god in their oldest layer. The goatfish is tied to Ea. Aquarius is tied to Ea pouring waters. When Greek storytellers later graft Typhon onto Capricorn and Pisces, they are unintentionally restoring an older logic that the Greek audience might not have consciously known. In the Babylonian layer, these figures are part of a water theology.
In the Greek layer, they become part of a monster escape narrative. The two layers fit because the underlying reality is the same. Water is where power hides. Water is where life begins again after disaster. Water is where the wise god lives, and water is where frightened gods run. Typhon also helps explain why these symbols keep attracting moral interpretation. Myths about monsters are rarely just entertainment. They are lessons about what a society thinks threatens it. In a world where cities can be destroyed by flood or fire or invasion, a monster myth provides a single face for many forms of ruin. It becomes a story you can retell in a way that keeps the danger present without paralyzing the listener. You can teach children that power is fragile. You can teach leaders that arrogance invites collapse. You can teach everyone that survival sometimes depends on humility, on accepting help, on changing form, on leaving pride behind. That is exactly what the Pisces chord teaches if you take it seriously. The fish are not triumphant. They are not swimming for pleasure. They are fleeing, and they are bound. And the bond is what saves them. If you want to see where later astrologers got the idea that Pisces relates to empathy and sacrifice, you do not need modern psychology. You can read it right there. Pisces is salvation through connection. In a Typhon world, the bond is more valuable than independence. The current will separate you if you pretend you can swim alone. The Capricorn image offers a different lesson. Capricorn is the survival of the adaptable. Pan does not hold his ground. He does not insist on being one thing. He changes. He becomes a boundary creature. There is a cold realism in that. The world does not reward stubbornness in every situation. Sometimes stubbornness is death. Capricorn becomes a sign that later cultures read as endurance, but endurance is not always standing still. Endurance can be the willingness to become something else, to keep moving. That is why the original goat-fish image is so powerful. It is not a metaphor of purity. It is a metaphor of compromise with reality. Now bring Aquarius back into this Typhon chapter and the connection becomes clearer. Aquarius is often presented as the water bearer, a figure with agency. He is not the one pushed into the river. He is the one controlling the release. In myth, this becomes Ganymede serving drink to the gods, a role that depends on trust and proximity to power. In the older Mesopotamian layer, it is the god of subterranean waters and wisdom pouring out the supply that makes civilization possible. Between Capricorn and Pisces,
Aquarius is the reminder that water is not only something you flee into, it is also something you manage, store, distribute, and fear. A society that builds canals learns that water is a political substance. A society that tells Typhon stories learns that water is also an emergency substance. Aquarius sits between those truths. This is one of the reasons the watery neighborhood of the sky feels coherent. Even when later astrology assigns Aquarius to air and Capricorn to earth, the ancient images are not built from element categories. They are built from stories about how the year behaves and how disaster behaves. The water themes persist because the region of sky they occupy and the season they mark is tied to water realities in the ancient world. When the year turns and the cold months settle in, storms come, rivers change, people talk about flood and scarcity. The sky figures that rise in those months become associated with the behaviors people see on the ground. There is also a more technical reason the Typhon connection persisted. Once the zodiac becomes a system used for horoscopes, each sign needs distinctive mythic material that can be used as shorthand. An astrologer does not have time to explain all of Mesopotamian theology every time they mention Capricorn. They need a story hook. Pan and Typhon provides one. Aphrodite, Eros, and the fish provide another. These hooks are memorable because they are crisis stories. A crisis compresses meaning. A crisis creates an image you can carry. A man becomes a goatfish. A goddess ties herself to her child. The details become symbols that can be repeated in art, in poetry, and eventually in the simple language of modern horoscope columns. But in the ancient world, the use was not always private. It could be public and political. We already saw how Capricorn became a symbol used on Roman coinage and imperial imagery. The Typhon myth layer makes that kind of symbolism even more useful, because it lets a ruler imply that they are the one who survived chaos, the one who ushered in order after a monster era. Empires love that story. They rarely say it directly, but they love to imply it. A sea goat on money or in decoration can carry the whisper that the state has a cosmic foundation, that chaos has been beaten back, that the ruler's reign is part of the same rhythm as the seasons. In this sense, Typhon is not just a monster. He is a narrative tool that binds myth to calendar and calendar to power. He stands for the moment when everything can fail, and that makes him useful for explaining why stability matters. If your audience understands what it means for a river to change course or for a storm to erase a harvest, then the idea of a monster that almost unmade the divine world will not feel childish.
It will feel like an elevated version of everyday dread. You can see this cultural seriousness in how often flood myths appear as a way to talk about moral reset. Deucalion survives, and the world begins again. In Mesopotamian literature, there are flood narratives too, where a chosen survivor preserves life and a new order emerges. These stories are not identical, but they share a purpose. They explain why society needs rules, why humans owe respect to forces bigger than themselves, and why memory matters. A flood wipes away records. A flood erases boundaries. A flood forces people to start again and to rebuild. The Zodiac, in its own way, is a system designed to preserve memory, to say even if the river wipes the fields clean, the stars will still rise in their season. That is why the Typhon chapter belongs in this story. It shows how a set of symbols that began as sky markers and divine emblems became over time a connected myth cycle about catastrophe and survival. Capricorn and Pisces are not random. They are the mythic consequences of living with water and fear. Aquarius is the symbol of water as controlled power placed between flight and rescue. Together, they form a watery arc, a sequence that feels like winter itself.
a time when danger is not theoretical and the value of preparation becomes obvious. In practical terms, the sequence also mirrors what happens to a community under stress. First comes the shock, the moment when a threat appears and everything you assumed about stability is questioned. That is Typhon arriving. Then comes adaptation, the frantic decision to become what you must to live. That is Capricorn. Then comes management, the attempt to restore order, distribute resources, hold society together. That is Aquarius. Finally comes dependency, the recognition that nobody survives alone, that bonds and help matter, that escape sometimes requires being carried. That is Pisces. These are not personality types, they are survival stages written into story and sky. And once you notice that, the chord in Pisces begins to feel like the true center of this whole section of the zodiac. The chord is the visible sign that turns these myths into something more than monster tales. It is the admission that love and loyalty are not sentimental extras, they are tools. They are the equipment you bring into the flood. So when later astrologers describe Pisces as compassionate, Capricorn as determined, Aquarius as concerned with the collective, they are drawing from a deep well, even if they do not always realize how old the well is. The traits are later language. The core is older. The core is a set of myths and images about what happens when the world becomes unstable and how life continues. Anyway, once the goatfish had a name, and the water-bearer had his jar, and the twin fishes had their cord, the next step was not poetry. The next step was filing. People forget how much of the zodiac's survival comes down to paperwork, to lists copied and corrected over centuries, to scholars who treated the sky as something you could map and measure, not only admire. Myth gave the figures a face, but the calendar gave them authority, and calculation gave them reach. In Mesopotamia, the same culture that kept accounts of grain and silver also kept astronomical records. They tracked the moon's months, the planet's motions, the moment a star first appeared before dawn, after its season of invisibility. They wrote down omens because kings asked for them and because city life demanded prediction, even if the prediction came wrapped in theology. By the late first millennium BCE, the zodiac becomes something close to a grid laid across the sky road. 12 equal sections that let you say where the sun and planets are in a way that can be repeated and compared. That is the turning point where Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces stop being only star pictures and begin to function as coordinates. This is also where the zodiac becomes portable. A constellation depends on the sky you can see and the horizon you stand under. A sign as a 30-degree section of an abstract circle can travel. You can teach it to a student who has never seen the southern stars clearly. You can write it in a handbook. You can apply it in a place where the climate is different and still keep the structure. That portability helps explain how the zodiac spread through the Hellenistic world after Alexander, when Greek language and scholarship moved through Egypt, the Levant, and Mesopotamia, meeting older temple traditions and absorbing them. Greek thinkers did not simply copy Babylonian methods, they translated them into Greek categories, then argued about what those categories meant. They tied signs to the four elements in a philosophical way that fit their worldview. They assigned planets as rulers and built a system of dignities and strengths. They debated whether the stars caused events or merely signaled them. Some treated astrology as fate written in the heavens, others as a natural influence like weather. What matters for our story is that Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces were pulled into this new framework and reinterpreted without losing their older, water-stained past. The cultural names tell you a lot about what each society thought it was looking at. In the Greco-Roman world, Capricorn is the horned goat, Aquarius is the water carrier, Pisces is the fishes. Those labels are descriptive, almost blunt. In Indian astrology, the same stretch of the zodiac is named differently. Capricorn becomes Makara, a creature whose identity shifts between crocodile, sea monster, and composite beast depending on region and art style. Aquarius becomes Kumbha, the jar, a word that puts the vessel itself at the center rather than the person holding it. Pisces becomes Mina, the fish, simple and direct. The point is not that one tradition is truer than the other. The point is that each culture preserved what it felt was essential. For India, the shore and river monster made sense as an emblem for Capricorn's domain, and the jar made sense as Aquarius's heart. Those choices keep the water theme alive, even when later Western astrology insists Capricorn is earth and Aquarius is air. The images do not care about our neat categories. They care about what humans actually saw and feared and needed. If you look east again, toward China, you find a different approach entirely. Traditional Chinese astronomy did not build its sky around the Western zodiac signs, but around lunar mansions and large asterisms tied to imperial symbolism and seasonal markers. Yet even there, the same sky objects exist, and when Chinese and Western systems met through later cultural contact, people made correspondences and translations. You can treat that as a modern overlay, but it illustrates a basic truth. The zodiac is one way to divide the sky, not the only way. It spread far because it was practical and because it came bundled with a compelling mix of myth and method. It could sit beside other systems without fully replacing them. That coexistence is part of why astrology has endured. It adapts to local maps, local stories, local seasons, then presents itself as if it has always belonged there. The most visible shift in interpretation happens when signs are tied to elements and modalities. In the Western tradition that hardened in the Hellenistic period and later, Capricorn is assigned to earth and to the cardinal mode. Aquarius is assigned to air and to the fixed mode. Pisces is assigned to water and to the mutable mode. Those labels are not ancient Babylonian facts. They are a later structure that tries to make the zodiac internally coherent. Cardinal signs begin seasons. Fixed signs stabilize seasons. Mutable signs close seasons and prepare transition. In that scheme, Capricorn begins winter. Aquarius stabilizes winter. Pisces dissolves winter into spring. You can feel how clean that is. It is the mind trying to create order from repetition. Even if you do not believe astrology predicts human events, this seasonal logic is not nonsense. It describes how a year feels to people who live in temperate climates. Planetary rulerships add another layer, and this is where cultural history becomes tangled with astronomy. In the traditional Western scheme, Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. Aquarius is also ruled by Saturn. Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. Saturn is the slowest visible planet to the naked eye, associated with time, limits, and endurance. So it fits Capricorn's winter threshold and also fits Aquarius's association with structures and systems. Jupiter is bright, expansive, and linked to growth and fortune, so it fits Pisces as a sign of overflow and compassion, a late season opening into renewal.
In modern astrology, after the discovery of Uranus and Neptune, many astrologers added Uranus as co-ruler of Aquarius and Neptune as co-ruler of Pisces. That addition is a good example of how astrology absorbs new astronomy by reassigning meaning. Uranus, associated with sudden change and disruption, was grafted onto Aquarius's reputation for innovation. Neptune, associated with mystery and dissolution, was grafted onto Pisces' reputation for dreams and boundlessness. Whether you find that convincing depends on what you think astrology is, but as a cultural process, it is easy to understand. The system wants every new planet to have a home,
and it chooses the home that best matches the stories people already tell about that sign. Now, return to the older myths with this framework in mind, and you can see how later meanings grew without needing to be invented from scratch. Capricorn's mythic root is a boundary creature tied to a water god and later to Pan's escape in a crisis. Put Saturn on top of that, and Capricorn becomes endurance under pressure, adaptation, survival through discipline, the long climb that does not stop when the weather turns. The goat part of the creature supports the mountain metaphor. The fishtail supports the idea that Capricorn has depths hidden under a practical surface. People say that Capricorn is reserved but strong. That is a modern psychological reading, but the image already suggests it. A goatfish is not a showy animal. It is a creature built to exist at the edge of two worlds. In history, communities that survive winter and flood do not do it by flamboyance. They do it by storing what matters and by moving carefully. Aquarius, placed as fixed air in the later scheme, gathers meanings about the mind and the group. Yet the mythic root is water and distribution, a jar pouring out what keeps life going.
Fixed suggests persistence. Air suggests ideas and communication. Combine those with the water bearer and you get a sign described as principled, stubborn in belief, oriented towards society rather than the private self. Again, you do not need to accept astrology as literal to see the metaphor. A water bearer in a city is part of a network. He moves between households, between wells, between storage and need. He is a conduit. That becomes an easy metaphor for someone who moves ideas between people. The Ganymede story reinforces it too. A cupbearer stands inside a hierarchy, but serves the whole table. He is close to power, but defined by service. Pisces is the one that most openly accepts its water identity because it remains a water sign. Its myths are about rescue and about the cord that prevents separation. Mutable suggests transition and permeability. Water suggests emotion, empathy, and absorption. Put those together, and Pisces becomes the sign of boundaries dissolving, of feeling other people's pain, of imagination that can heal or overwhelm. But again, that is not a modern invention. The cord in the Pisces image is a boundary. The fish swim in opposite directions. The boundary is tested. The rescue myth adds salvation through connection. The egg myth adds protection of fragile beginnings. Later interpretations about compassion, sacrifice, and spiritual longing feel like a natural extension of those stories. Historical interpretations also changed because the sky itself changes, and anyone who works with calendars eventually runs into that fact. Earth's axial wobble causes precession, meaning the point of the equinox drifts slowly through the constellations over centuries. Ancient astrologers developed the zodiac as an abstract division. Later, Western astrology uses a tropical zodiac, anchored to the equinoxes and solstices, rather than to the current positions of constellations. That means Capricorn, the sign, stays tied to the seasonal beginning of winter, even if the constellation Capricornus shifts relative to that seasonal point over long time. In India, many astrologers use a sidereal zodiac that ties signs more closely to the constellations, adjusting for precession with an offset. This difference between tropical and sidereal frameworks is one of the reasons people argue about zodiac dates today. But historically, it shows a deeper truth. The zodiac was never only a matter of looking up at star shapes. It was also a mathematical scheme built for prediction and continuity. A scheme survives by choosing an anchor. Western tradition chose the seasons. Other traditions chose the stars more directly. The zodiac also gathered different meanings as it passed through different social classes. In early Mesopotamian practice, celestial omens and interpretations were often tied to the king and the state. The sky was red for the health of the realm. As personal horoscopes became more common in the Hellenistic period, astrology moved into private life. A sign could become part of identity. That shift changes how people talk about the signs. A state omen is about harvest, war, plague, the fate of a dynasty. A personal horoscope is about temperament, fortune, marriage, career. When Capricorn moves from being the emblem of Ea's goatfish into being the sign that describes a person's character, it acquires moral language.
Discipline becomes a trait rather than a seasonal demand. Ambition becomes personal rather than political. Aquarius becomes less about a god pouring out cosmic waters and more about how someone thinks and relates to community. Pisces becomes less about Aphrodite fleeing Typhon and more about how someone feels and loves. The myths do not disappear. They become background justification for the traits. It is worth noticing how often those traits, when written plainly, still map onto practical social roles. Capricorn is said to build, to plan, to endure. That resembles the role of a steward, a builder, a lawkeeper, someone who manages resources through scarcity. Aquarius is said to innovate, to organize groups, to stand for principles. That resembles the role of a reformer, a council member, a network builder, someone who moves ideas through a community. Pisces is said to empathize, to imagine, to absorb, to heal, sometimes to escape. That resembles the role of a priest, an artist, a healer, someone who deals in what is invisible and emotional. Ancient societies needed all those roles. When astrologers describe signs this way, they are often describing social archetypes that exist whether or not the sky causes them. The differences between cultures become clearer when you look at what each culture emphasized in these three signs. Mesopotamia emphasized water as wisdom and power. The Greeks emphasized narrative crisis and personal transformation. Rome emphasized symbolism that could support imperial identity. India emphasized the monster and the jar, Makara and Kumbha, images that keep the water theme but reshape it into local myth language. None of this is accidental. Each society took what it needed. The zodiac is a skeleton that can wear different clothes. Even within the Greco-Roman world, interpretation was not uniform. Philosophers argued about whether astrology was deterministic or merely suggestive. Some framed it as a natural science, an extension of the idea that celestial bodies influence the sublunar world through heat, light, and cycles, similar to how the moon influences tides and seasons. Others treated it as a symbolic language, where signs correspond to earthly things without necessarily causing them. Practitioners built complex techniques, calculating lots and aspects and house placements, then used them to advise clients. That practice produced a literature of astrology, technical and sometimes dense, that kept signs anchored in rules rather than in vague sayings. When you read about Capricorn in those texts, you often see it described in terms of cold and dryness, of melancholic temperament, of seriousness. Aquarius, being air in the later scheme, gathers associations with breath, circulation, intellectual pursuits, social ties. Pisces, being water, gathers associations with fluids, the feet, the sea, wandering, and devotion. These lists can feel strange today, but they are consistent within their own logic. They show astrology acting like a pre-modern attempt at a total system,
connecting body, society, and sky. Over time, the zodiac also became visual culture, not just written theory. Medieval manuscripts illustrated the signs as scenes of seasonal work. Capricorn might be shown with a goat or with people warming themselves by fire because winter had become the dominant association. Aquarius might be shown as a figure pouring water, sometimes with a winter rain context.
Pisces might be shown as fish, sometimes tied together, sometimes swimming as a pair. When people saw these images year after year, the seasonal reading reinforced itself. The mythic root remained, but the everyday interpretation became stronger because it matched lived experience. In a European winter, a goatfish associated with cold makes a kind of sense, even if the fishtail is a mystery. In a late winter period, fish imagery makes sense because fishing seasons and religious fasts and coastal life keep fish present in the mind. Art does what it always does. It translates symbols into what the local audience understands. Then there is language itself. The way people talk about the signs shapes what they become. A goatfish is weird. People either forget the fish part or invent a reason for it. A water bearer is simple, so people start to moralize it, turning it into generosity, service, knowledge, or rebellion depending on the era. Two fish tied together invites metaphor, so Pisces becomes a sign of duality and longing. Once those metaphors become common, they become self-reinforcing. A person who identifies with Capricorn reads Capricorn traits and recognizes themselves. That recognition strengthens the trait list's cultural power. The zodiac becomes a mirror people choose to look into. It stops being only a sky map and becomes a story about human life. At this stage, after myth has become method and method has become identity, the zodiac begins to drift into the modern world with two faces. One face is scholarly and historical, rooted in Mesopotamian tablets and Hellenistic handbooks and medieval art. The other face is popular, simplified into short descriptions and daily forecasts. The popular face is not a betrayal. It is what happens to any complex system that spreads widely. People take the parts that are easiest to carry. Capricorn becomes the hard worker. Aquarius becomes the visionary. Pisces becomes the dreamer. Those are not wrong as cultural shorthand, but they are smaller than the original. The original includes water gods, monster chases, cords tied in panic, jars that decide harvest, and a calendar that held civilizations together. If you want to understand why these three signs still feel connected even in modern interpretations, it helps to return to the outline of their sequence. Capricorn is the boundary creature at the start of the harsh season. Aquarius is the distributor, the one who handles the substance the community needs. Pisces is the pair in the current, salvation through connection, the last stretch before renewal. That sequence makes emotional sense, even if you never read a horoscope. It is a seasonal narrative and a social narrative. It is about surviving scarcity, organizing resources, and staying tied to what matters as you move toward change. When people say astrology is just stories, they often mean it dismissively. But stories are how humans preserve survival knowledge. The zodiac is a story machine that has outlived empires. And now, as this system carries forward, the question becomes, what happens to these ancient signs when they are placed into modern life, where few people depend directly on the river's flood for their survival, where the calendar is printed and lit by screens, where myth is entertainment and also identity, where a sea goat can appear on a coffee mug and still carry 2,000 years of history without anyone noticing. The images remain. Capricorn still keeps its horns and often its tail. Aquarius still pours. Pisces still swims as a pair. They show up in tattoos, in novels, in art, in quiet jokes between friends, and in the way people try to describe themselves when ordinary language feels too small. And that is where the last chapter begins to take shape. What endured was never the certainty of prediction, but the stubborn usefulness of the symbols.
Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces outlived the temple schools that first named them and the empires that later stamped them onto coins and ceilings because they kept fitting new worlds. In late antiquity and the Middle Ages, the zodiac became a visual language that could sit inside churches, palaces, and manuscripts without needing anyone to agree on whether the stars caused fate. A reader could treat the signs as calendar markers, reminders of seasonal work and holy days, while another treated them as keys to temperament, and a third treated them as inherited stories about gods who once ran from monsters. The images were compact enough to travel, and the meanings were loose enough to survive translation. Pisces gathered a special kind of echo in the Roman world that followed. Fish were common symbols long before Christianity, but in the early Christian centuries, the fish became a quiet sign of belonging, used in art and graffiti and small objects as a way to recognize other believers without declaring it publicly. That later adoption did not come from the constellation directly, but it lived easily beside it because both already carried the idea of salvation through water. Baptism was an immersion and a crossing. A fish is a creature that does not drown. When people spoke about the age of Pisces centuries later, or when modern writers used Pisces to suggest a period of faith, sacrifice, and longing, they were drawing on a long chain of association where the symbol kept meeting the same human needs: safety, community, and the hope of being carried through danger. Capricorn and Aquarius took a different path, less overtly religious and more political and philosophical.
Capricorn's link with Saturn and winter discipline made it a favorite emblem for endurance and order in medieval and Renaissance imagination. Even when the sea-goat tail was treated as a decorative oddity, Aquarius, as the water-bearer, was easy to fold into allegory. It could stand for charity, for the flow of knowledge, for the management of a city's life, blood, and later for ideals about society itself. When early modern thinkers argued about reform, about reason, about the public good, the water-bearer was an image that could be made to fit without much strain. Because pouring water is a simple act that can be read as generosity or as control, depending on who holds the jar. In the modern world, these signs became lighter, faster, easier to print, but they did not become empty. People still reach for Capricorn when they want a symbol of persistence, Aquarius when they want a symbol of principle, Pisces when they want a feeling that runs deeper than words. That is not proof of cosmic mechanism. It is proof that the old images are still sharp enough to cut through ordinary language. A sea-goat, a water-bearer, two fish tied together. Those are not abstract shapes. They are stories about survival, distribution, and connection. And even now, when most people live far from the rivers that first taught these lessons, the lessons still land.